All right. This is my family. This is going to be my audience. That's Mom, Dad, Emmett, and Sebastian. Hello. All right. Now today's really fun topic is actually going to be about how the upper echelon communicates and kind of like the history behind it, because this is going to be a research paper. So my 5-page paper, obviously, the first thing that we want to do is analyze the differences between the working class and the upper echelon. So who is in what different kind of culture, and how does that determine how they communicate? So there was a really good paper by a guy named William Form that I did analyze, and he tried to do this, but he said that a lot of sociologists have issues with determining who kind of is in the working class, because a lot of people will say just blue collar workers or just factory workers, but actually for the most part in today's world we have a lot of white collar workers, pink collar workers who kind of fit into that mold as part of the working class, even some white collar workers who maybe don't make as much money. So anyone below about 70 to 80 grand a year in income is going to be considered our working class individuals. And what we can do is we usually use Hofstede's cultural dimensions to determine each side of the term here. So there's the wealthy class and the upper echelon. And these people are actually technically considered a different culture than the working class and the lower individuals. And if you look at this through Hofstede's cultural dimension, you can actually kind of determine this yourself. So when we look at the dominant culture and the majority culture, right, which is going to be the working class in America, there's more of them, they actually are low context. So what that means when you have a low context society is you have individuals who are very direct. So for instance, if I have a disagreement with you, I'm going to go up and tell you that I have a disagreement with you. I'm going to express my concerns. I'm going to express how I feel, and it's a very open sort of communication. So in America, we have a lot of that. We're also very individualistic, which means that we value risk. We value upward mobility. We value the ability to kind of, as the boomers say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That is something that we as Americans really value. However, in the upper echelon, what we see is something really dynamic. We see a shift. So with the upper echelon, we have more of a high context culture, because there is a lot of there's a lot more at stake. So there are reputations and family names and heritage that's at stake when you're communicating in the upper echelon. So what you're having individuals who kind of want a loophole. They want to communicate in high context, so they want to say something to your face that kind of means something a little different, or that can be interpreted a different way. And we see this a lot in other collectivist cultures. So places like East Asia, we see this a lot. And what happens is it creates this sort of like gray area in communication, and it's just so that people can get away with saying how they feel, but not really. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the differences in the wealthy culture is actually very broad now, because in the time of like real aristocrats, so sometimes in like the 1920s, just before the Great Depression, before the World Wars that kind of built the working class, and the work on the time clock and stuff like that, what we had is just old money. So just generational wealth. We had like the Carnegies and just big names. But now what we're seeing this like instantaneous upward mobility because of the internet and the rise of digitization. And what that means is that people are able to basically get wealthy overnight. So now what there's been this divide between old money. Old money individuals are people who have generational wealth. They've been wealthy for generations. They have manners. They are taught these things intuitively by their parents. Usually they're raised in areas like this. And then what we see new money, which usually means that these individuals are wealthy, but they weren't always wealthy. So they're, maybe the first generation who has a little bit of excess income. And we see kind of more flaunt of their wealth, which is more common. And when they do this, it means that in their communication, they're showing that they're like superior. But what we see is the divide between these, kind of like the bipartisanship. We're seeing this really big divide between like conservative old money individuals who communicate in a very different way, where they're very subtle and they have a bunch of a distaste for the new money individuals. Not necessarily for upward mobility necessarily, but just because they are a very different culture. So we see that. We also can determine how individuals, usually children, are going to feel about money and feel about wealth from these things called money scripts, which is basically just the mindset that they grow up with surrounding money. So this is obviously influenced by several things. It's influenced by jobs, parents, financial literacy, education, all sorts of different things coming in from their life. These money scripts are specifically money avoidance, money status, money worship, and money vigilance. And these 4 things are really important because they help us kind of determine our children and how they're going to feel about money and if they might be wealthy in the future. This is kind of a really good way to gauge that. So that is all I have for today, and I really appreciate you for listening. You gonna say bye?
Bye. Thank you.
Oh, Emmett's happy.